So when I was about 14, I'd like to say I tried writing a nocturne in the style of Chopin, a pastiche, and I had I received a comment from a very kind woman who gave me some constructive criticism, some advice, and told me that those chromatic runs that you so often get in Chopin, they're not there just to be there. They're devices of melody. They have to have shape. They need to contribute something maybe to the harmony. And that was really important advice. And this is a sort of response to the music professor's video that he did recently, where we talked quite a bit about ornamentation. And thinking about how Chopin was so influenced by bel canto opera, it made me think about Baroque music, actually, Italian music in particular. And it made me think of, for example, Corelli. Corelli actually wrote down some of his thoughts on ornamentation. And if you know anything about Baroque performance, it's that you have to add ornamentation a lot of the time. And so in Corelli, for example, there is one pattern in particular where you leap down a seventh and then up a sixth, which creates a dissonance, a sort of implied suspension, if you will, that you can, for example, do at the end of a cadence, and it adds some color. Dissonance always increases, or I shouldn't say always, but very often increases how expressive music can be. And then there is also Vivaldi. And with Vivaldi, it gets weirder. He has, for example, in RV 581, if you look at Anna Maria's part book, Anna Maria was one of his students, probably the most famous, a very skilled violinist. If you look at Anna Maria's part book, which is on IMSLP, you can find an ornamented version of RV 581's second movement. And it is fascinating. I think Michael Talbot says that if Vivaldi had written a method of playing an adagio, he would have maybe used this as his example. It's extremely elaborate. You get from this extremely simple part of the soloist's part of just, like quarter notes, dotted quarter notes, eighth notes. You go from that to something that almost looks Chopin-esque, and you get these strange chromaticisms. For example, there is a G sharp up against a G natural, and it's sort of like the harmony in the solo part, the G sharp, is skipping ahead of the bassetto, which is what Michael Talbot calls the accompaniment when it's comprised of the violins and viola in the orchestra, instead of the basso continuo playing a sort of bass line that you would expect more from a basso continuo, right? And the result, as I said, is very Chopin-esque. You also get at the end an added cadenza that isn't in the original part, but for the embellished version, there are a few bars of a sort of like cadenza-like passage. And there is this downward scale, and I believe it goes like G, F sharp, E flat, and we're like, the home key is C major, right? G, F sharp, E flat, D flat, so Neapolitan, C, and then it goes on from there. That chromaticism for a piece of that time is really amazing. And again, it lends the piece more color than it originally had. And it really informs us because we don't really have a lot to go off when we ask ourselves, how would Vivaldi have ornamented his own music? It seems like this is a bit of a guide for a slow movement of that nature. And then there's also RV208, and while there isn't an embellished version of it, as far as I know, it does have an extremely ornate second movement that is also marked grave recitativo. And it is so rhythmically elaborate. Oh, by the way, Bach actually, he transcribed RV208. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. The ornamentation is so elaborate, and you get these really delightful rhythms, like near the beginning when there's this tumble downwards and then it just stops and there's a small rest at the beginning of the next measure, and then the end of the movement, the melody just trails off beat. Like that's almost sort of like 19th century-esque writing. And yeah, and that's a fairly early piece by Vivaldi too, written around the same time as his third opus. But yeah, no, Vivaldi, you can get so much that really hints at future eras, and it's really a shame that there isn't um, much study given to him, at least available on the internet, that there's much more discussion about more German music, and I think that musicology sort of has a small bias towards uh, like the sort of Germanic tradition in music rather than the Italian tradition, which is a shame because not only is the Italian tradition so rich, but we're also ignoring the fact that there's so much interaction between different styles and traditions in the world of classical music. Um, what was I going to say? Oh, yes, but no, in late Vivaldi, for example, there is so much that you can find that points at future styles. For example, in RV 514, I believe, a double violin concerto in D minor, the second movement, the fugal opening, it almost sounds like a Beethoven string quartet. It's really fascinating. And to me, it's really sad that late Vivaldi doesn't really get that much attention. Um, it's mostly early and middle Vivaldi, especially middle Vivaldi, you know, the Four Seasons, blah, blah, blah. Shouldn't say blah, 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 Four Seasons is amazing. But yeah, no, late Vivaldi never gets talked about really. The only two pieces from late Vivaldi that I think are relatively well known are the famous E minor bassoon concerto and the famous concerto for viola d'amore and lute in D minor. But other than those two, you don't really see much. And I think late Vivaldi especially, like if you really want to hear late Vivaldi, it's his violin concertos that he writes near the end of his life that really exemplify those qualities. And I really want to do a video on that one day, but I don't really know how to edit well, so we'll see where that goes. Thank you.